Our guest speaker today is speaking to something that's very close to our heart at Da Vinci, and that is many people argue with us that we haven't even made it to the fourth industrial revolution in South Africa. Why is Da Vinci speaking about the fifth? And Loic is certainly here to, sort of put pay to that. And he's going to be speaking about the ethical human business challenges or opportunities in transforming companies in the wake of a global COVID crisis and fifth industrial revolution. So he's really a speaker that I'm very excited to hear, because I think that he's got very different perspectives on things. He has many years' experience at the helm of corporations and as a CEO, both in Africa and Europe. He's managed things like turnarounds, market entries, mergers, acquisitions. He's driven exponential scaling, differentiated and disruptive changes successfully. And that's why I'm really excited to hear him speak about this dance between, technology, humaneness, pandemics versus calm, very much speaking to the Da Vinci frames. He's an alumni of the Singularity University, London Business School, the Louvain School of Management, and Gibbs. So certainly an academic as well as, a business leader. He's a very versatile, multilingual, creative maverick, and certainly an intuitive strategist. When you deal with things like mergers and turnarounds, you have to be rather intuitive and innovative in your strategic approach. And he really does pride himself in terms of shaping organizations into how they could best show up and show their voices at their future selves. And Loic, I don't know if you know this about Da Vinci, but for us, showing up and showing, your voice and raising your voice is something that is really critical to us. So the fact that you are someone who is, because we do believe in disruptive innovation, so the fact that you are a maverick is certainly very Da Vincian. And you certainly are a celebrity as well, being a regular speaker on CNBC and many other media platforms. But for us, we are really grateful that we're going to get a little bit of your time as you take us through this disruptive leap that we are dealing with. And your organization is, speaking, I think the name is so fitting, Disruptive Leap, which is an advisory and investment boutique firm specializing in getting organizations to their 10 times their growth and margins through a distinct disruptive journey. So you certainly speak our Da Vinci. When I spoke earlier about truth, disruptive innovation is very much focused on our practice. So we look forward to hearing your disruptive thoughts and your maverick approaches to how we are facing both the fifth industrial revolution as well as the COVID crisis. So without further ado, I hand over to Loic to take us through his thoughts.
Thank you, Dr. Cronin, and very good to meet everyone. So in preparation of our discussion today, I was told that instead of death by PowerPoint, it could rather be a conversation. And so I'll make ample use in trying to have everyone contributing to the conversation. I'll make ample use to the chat box. And so the chat box is the one you see at the bottom of your screen. And then, as an attempt to have as many participants sharing their thoughts and to building a little bit of a case study together. And so to make it a little bit less theoretical and very much real life practical, I thought I would pick up a case and a real case. So, and the case I took is when I was the CEO of Securitas a few years ago for this part of the world. Securitas is an 8 billion euro global company, 300,000 employees, 50 plus countries, and listed on the stock exchange in Stockholm. It's in the services industry, in the security services industry, and it does all sorts of operational security services, being guarding services, being training schools, control rooms, operational technologies such as access control, CCTV, and so on and so forth for businesses, for residential, and so on. And so a few years ago, I was CEO in South Africa. I arrived here in 2009, and I first started building up the business for about 4 years. from the ground, and then accelerated the growth through acquiring a number of companies. And fast forward 4 years later, we were a fairly well-established company here with 4 subsidiaries across the country, 4,000 employees, numerous training centers, a couple of hundred cars on the road, and so on. So a good corporate business here. The problem I was faced with at the time was the lack of sustainability of the local industry. You would have, and to set the scene and to give you a bit of context, we had at the time 9,000 competitors, from extremely small to very big companies. We had a fairly well-established legislatory framework in terms of, for example, standards of and ethics of conduct, but also legislated basic wages and conditions of employment and so on. And so with a very harsh competitive landscape with 9,000 companies, I also realized fairly quickly that we were facing an illegal competitive landscape, as in literally thousands of companies, and especially the smaller to medium-sized ones, but even some of the very larger ones, were cutting corners in terms of not abiding by the legislated wages and underpaying their staff, and not paying the overtime or the Sunday pay, or recharging back for uniforms or training, all sorts of ways. And in a very thin operating margin industry, I realized that as an ethical player, as an ethical company, I couldn't sustain the company. And what was the problem is that normally you have a cost in your company, right? Then you have a little bit of overheads, then hopefully you have a little bit of profit margin, you pay your taxes, and then what's left is the reward for the shareholders, hopefully for the reinvesting in the company to make it sustainable, right? But now the legislated cost price had become the industry selling price, which means that as a legally operating business, I couldn't cover my overheads, let alone have a profit margin, let alone pay any tax because there wasn't a profit margin, let alone any reinvestment in the business, and so on and so forth. And so in the landscape there, I realized in its current form, the business wasn't sustainable anymore. Now, the responsibility I had was around the various stakeholders in the business, 4,000 households or employees, which we had the responsibility to sustain, or numerous suppliers, or numerous clients, or numerous the shareholders. And so all of a sudden, it had not become sustainable anymore. And so the first question I have for you, and I'd like to place all of you in the shoes of the CEO of the company, and to say, faced with this, what are the options you're going to choose? And a couple of them came to mind. Either you could try to lobby the government for better enforcement in the industry and hope that all the companies would end up abiding by the law. Or I guess you could try harder, doing more of the same, and see what becomes of that. Or you could exit the market. Or you could go to the dark side, thinking maybe should we be pragmatic, and should we also underpay our employees, but at least the little they would get would be better than nothing. And so out of these various ethical, practical considerations, what would your choice be? And I'd like to invite everyone to turn to the chat box, and in a very summarized version, just a few words, tell me what the first thing that comes to mind. What's the way forward? You're responsible for 4,000 households. You're responsible for a company. What will you do? Okay, I can see that the first comment is a new model of doing business, other ways of doing some of the work. That's the first comment. Any other inputs? For the sake of moving the conversation forward, I'll continue. So let me first kill 90% of the usual options that companies take, which is the largest majority of things is really to do more of the same and try harder, working harder and doing more of the same and hoping that somehow life will become better. And so you would be amazed to understand and see and visualize that within corporate companies across the globe, it's extraordinarily less about changing business models. Maybe that's 1% of companies. 99% of companies, it will be doing more of the same, possibly with a twist, right? Putting it into a nice digital application or doing something or doing work groups or committees. But usually to have rapid transformational change does not occur for a large number of reasons. And so to kill a few options, for example, to lobby the government into trying to achieve a proper compliance within the industry is a very laudable action, but it's not done overnight. Governments usually move extremely slowly in most countries, and maybe especially in some emerging markets. And so efficiency of government and the time frame doesn't allow. And so if your company is under pressure like we were at the time, that's actually not an option unless we have $1 billion and 5 years of patience, which we didn't have at the time. Then it's not a very good option. To try harder, doing more of the same, just the rationale of the industry isn't there. And so if it's not likely to change, unless you wait for a miracle, then you better start doing something else. Exiting the market is not necessarily a good idea. I considered that at the time. Should we, for example, exit the market and resell our company? Also realized that there was a fair chance that then since the largest majority of competitors weren't ethical players, it would mean a probability that, or social responsibility in terms of looking after 4,000 employees, would be going in the wrong directions. People, after we had sold the group of companies, might be underpaid and and so that wasn't a very great idea. And we had just invested heavily into the market for the last few years, so we wanted to make it work. And so back to your answers, then we thought about pivoting the company and changing business models. And so we discovered, and to just chat about the journey a little bit. So we discovered and we invested into new technologies. To give you one very practical example, you can visualize security guards going around in industrial premises or an office park or a shopping mall to just patrol around the perimeter of the premises. And how not necessarily efficient that is. You can imagine that the guard will go around for half an hour, then rest for half an hour and start again. But on any given point of the perimeter, the guard will only protect that side of the perimeter for a few seconds, and then we'll move to the next few meters and so on and so forth. So maybe each part of the perimeter might be protected 5% of the time. So we started looking at the lens of what is the current reality the industry is facing and how the current ways of doing things and how efficient that really is, putting a bit of an external lens. And so the next leg of protection in terms of perimeter security is CCTV, as in a set of cameras. And that also isn't very efficient because it's essentially either retroactive, you can see the day after who robbed you the day before, but that's not much of a consolation, I'm afraid. Or you have a live person behind screens watching maybe 100 cameras at a time, and that also is not very efficient. And so we found that with video analytics and algorithm, you could create a virtual perimeter around the perimeter. You could pre-program alarms linked to the human shape of the body, and then you could have an on-the-spot immediate intervention. So a degree of efficiency that was 99.9% coming from maybe 5, 10, 20% with the guard walking around. And so with that, we introduced technology in our business, and it was a failure. So new tech didn't save the day. What was the key problem at that stage? Price was. We had an extraordinary technology, but we introduced a Rolls-Royce priced technology into a Tata or a Toyota market. And so we got 1 million likes for our technology, but nobody would buy it essentially, which at the end of the day was the aim. And so a second pitfall is usually that we think that technology is going to save the day. Well, it does not. That was our second learning. Because it still has to go through the life of and the framework of supply and demand and price points and in the right format to market. So understanding that, then we developed a model to approach directly companies and to then suggest a saving model based on replacing guards patrolling around and do leasings of technologies and still achieving, where there are enough guards walking around, enough of a saving for the client and giving them a multiplied efficiency. At that stage, then we knew how to, in 5 minutes, we had done modular pricing, modular approach to markets. And like, for example, when we had previously in complex technology installation, we needed 2 weeks to quote, we had changed that into a 5 minutes model. Into the complexity of pricing sheets was removed in the background, and we were able to quote within 5 minutes to a client on the spot. And so removing the complexity of the framework. And at that stage, we knew exactly within the 5 minutes on which site we could achieve more efficiency and the saving, and then how to pitch that with immediate effect. And we thought now we had solved the problem of sustainability within our framework, but in fact we didn't, because we understood that change management was an extraordinarily difficult component to go within our industry. And since we didn't have 15 long years to wait patiently for people to change their ways, their processes, and what they had been comfortable doing within our industry, I accelerated the change through the acquisition of a specialized company. I'm mindful of the time, so I'm trying to accelerate the case study. So we accelerated that with an acquisition who had actually sorted a number of those processes and go-to-market avenues. In the space of 4 years, we had quadrupled the EBIT in the company, making it from non-sustainable to very much sustainable on the back of annuity-based margins and revenue, so sustainable model. We also had the ability, a conundrum I was faced was, are we actually killing jobs? And are we destroying social fabrics in the process by replacing technology with jobs? And I will stop very soon to hear your take on all of that. But we realized that some of the tasks could be changed through technology. And so some of the jobs could be changed through technology. And one example is the perimeter patrolling, but some others couldn't. And so you still needed people to do the entrance control and see visitors in and do safety checks and a number of things that a camera, for example, or a piece of technology couldn't do. And so, but because of a new pivoted model that was now highly differentiated with comparison to the rest of the industry, where we had shifted basically competition to, we're competing against current security spend at client sites, and we were optimizing that instead of answering large tenders in a traditionally competitive economy. And so the approach to markets had allowed us to basically end the need for a number of jobs that a camera couldn't do. We had a net positive growth in employments. So we didn't have any restructuring to do, any reorganization, any letting go of staff. but we had actually guaranteed in this model the sustainability of the 4,000 jobs we had, which wasn't sustainable before. We had also then created new jobs, so technicians, control room operators, technical engineers, and so on. And so more skilled jobs at the end of the day. Now, having said that, so our impact was internally positive, and we had succeeded in our mission to bring sustainability to the business and all its stakeholders. Having said that, I believe a number of competitors had a negative net growth in jobs, and overall, we probably took out a number of work opportunities, and mainly non-legal abiding work opportunities. And so that's always been the debate. That's the debate we faced around that case study, and I'm conscious of time, so I want to open the floor now. So the key questions that inhabited us was, obviously, we need to pivot the business and we need to do different. We saw new technologies as opportunities and not threats, and we seized that. We went to extraordinary great lengths to understand how to shape a new puzzle to fit these new technologies into price points and market approaches that made sense. We accelerated that through new routes to market. Our net effect was positive. We reached, but very difficult to change manage the whole process. A number of my management team, a number of my exco couldn't do the switch from a traditional way of doing business to new, fast, accelerated ways, and a number dropped off along the way. We had to let go of a few. So, yeah, that's the process we went in.
I was wondering if you're familiar with the work of Chris Argyris on the double loop learning.
No, I'm not.
Because that I always felt, it's not new research. I think it was somewhere in the 1974, 75, 77, somewhere there. He published that, and basically what you've been saying, he asked the underlying questions on the assumptions, beliefs, and the values of why you take decisions. So it's not just what we do, it's also why we do what we do. And I think your example explained that. So you almost get into this double loop. Instead of just doing the obvious based on the current, you ask the future question and say, if the assumptions of underlying belief change, what will be the different circumstances, to almost get into the why we do what we do. And I always found that interesting. I know a lot of people are not in favor of reading old literature, but for me, it's always stood the test of time. And as you described that, I was realizing you were explaining the double loop learning theory that applied organizational learning and how transformation being guided. And I think your example is specific to that and a very good demonstration of that. And maybe I see, Paul, you have your hand raised if you have a view to that.
Thank you, HB. On reflecting on his case study, I have a question for him. So, Loic, thank you very much for the case study and how you pivoted into the future with regards to the challenge that you experienced. Now, my question relates to the issue of price, because in modern business, many companies have come to realize that while we are living in a technologically advanced society, technologically advanced age in business, the technology in itself is not always a solution. Like you've explained, you failed the first time because your price was an issue. So when we come to the issue of the pricing, did you segment your market, and how did you do that? Or was it just by chance that you adjusted the price and it improved the profitability? So my question then relates to, how did you segment your market? Thank you.
I could happily talk for that on that topic for half an hour that we don't have. But succinctly, I would say we shifted the market. And so in the traditional law of supply and demand, you have a narrow bandwidth in which to operate, right? You either are a cost-conscious actor, you hope to do volume on the back of a lower price, or you're a bit of a premium player and you'll achieve higher margins and higher price, but then your market tends to be smaller. But there's a certain bandwidth. You can't just ask for a guard, a car, a house, or whatever it is or services you're selling. You can't just ask for 3 times the price that your competitors are asking. And so we shifted that to something of a blue ocean, as in we shifted the benchmark and the comparison. So the traditional comparison is how much for the services of a guard or how much for a camera or 100 cameras. And as long as you go into that bandwidth and that paradigm, you'll be stuck on a narrow, and you could explore some niche markets, but you won't move the needle very far and very much. And we thought we needed to change that substantially. And so we did that by approaching directly the security spend of clients through a different lens. So not anymore how much for your 100 guards or 100 cameras, but actually what are you trying to achieve? You're spending a certain amount of security and questioning the current delivery of the current services. Like you're having 100 guards, what are they doing? What are you trying to achieve? You're trying to be safe and your employees and assets. Well, maybe there's another way we could achieve that. And to look for pockets of differentiation where a new technology could be applied within a very narrow price point, which is a guard replacement. And how many guards can we replace? What's the size of the perimeter? And does the math work there? And then we had a price point where it wasn't cost-based, like our cost is X, and then we'll add a little bit of overheads and a margin, but it's spend-based and client-based. And we saw that coming from a margin of 3%, where there were large inefficiencies in the market, and we could remove a large number of guards that we could then take into our services and deploy somewhere else on other client sites. We could then free up enough of a client budget. We defined also that there was an optimal point emotionally for a client around a cost saving, like as in call it a carrot to an offer that's too good to be true. And we calculate that at between 7 and 10% on security spend, which is usually large for corporation, a 7 to 10% guaranteed saving contractually, and a clearly better and more efficient service was an offer that was too good to pass on. And that differentiated offering gave us the acceleration to market, because we had shifted the benchmark to efficiency for your current spend versus asking the procurement department to do a tender for 100 guards or 100 cameras. And so it's the go-to-market approach and shifting the paradigm that allowed us to move then on those leasings of tax from 3% EBIT, or earnings before interest and tax, to 50% in certain cases, where we could literally exponentially increase our margins on the tech components to guarantee then sustainability on the 3% margins for. But it was a blue ocean shift and not a traditional pricing cost-based model or and so on, if that makes sense. I see a comment in the chat box around so we're talking of price points, huh? And so a new technologies of inventing the new technologies, like call it 3D printing, augmented reality, drones and whatever. It has to come within a certain price point into certain applications in certain industries and certain. So usually the inventors are not the ones reaping the economical benefits of the price, but when the technology has been actually coming down and more democratized in terms of price, then often you have the integrators, like companies who command large swaths of the market, who will then integrate that technology within a service, within a particular segment and market, and will then be able to achieve scalability and then efficiency within a certain domain, price point, service base, and so on. But all of that can at times take a couple of decades for new technologies.
Must maybe Marla move to wrapping it up?
As I said to you at the beginning, we've got Letta from Three Stickmen, who she shares her screen and she gives us a visual representation of what she thinks she's seen and heard today.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Kernan. So as we went through the discussion today, I captured in a combination of words and pictures the main insights that I got from the discussion. We started off talking about what is truth. And it's come out that truth is not straightforward. It is complex. There's a believed truth versus a real truth. And it's really about getting the dialogue going, getting the conversation happening. And then Rolton took us through the research that he's doing around the impact of regulation on the South African pharmaceutical industry. He spoke about the Act 101, the Medicines Control Act. He spoke about laws and regulation. The intention was obviously to serve the public interest, but it's unclear if the regulation really gives the man in the street that advantage. His research is focusing on three things: the single exit pricing, number two, the product patents to make sure that companies can get a return on investment, and then the serialization of products, which is coming soon. You also mentioned that it's really the whole supply chain, from manufacturing, the state distributors, right down to doctors and patients. The massive new regulation that's coming up, what is the practical impact on running the businesses? We need to assess the impact of that regulation both before and after the implementation to really make sure that we get the cost versus the benefits. He spoke about the fact that he's going to use the WHO assessment guide. He looked at a mixed research method, both qualitative and quantitative. He spoke about the fact that the travel restrictions because of COVID might limit some in-person research. And then there was quite a lot of discussion around the regulatory impact assessment bill, the SEIAS that you can see there. Michael Porter's model was mentioned. A post-evaluation should be done every time we put in new legislation. Did it achieve what it intended to achieve? What is the post-mortem? We also spoke about the iterative process between policy and practice. And then Dr. Kernan said, the return on investment is about not just the bottom line, but it's also about the social return. And a doctorate is about contributing something new to the field. So that was the overview of Rolton's research. And then we spoke about the case study. Loic took us through the Securitas case study. The fact is that the problem was a lack of sustainability in the business. The landscape made it very difficult to be profitable by doing the right thing. So if you are in this situation as a CEO, what do? Do you lobby government? It's going to take very long. Do you try harder? It might not work. Do you exit the market as a possibility? Or do you go off to the dark side? He spoke about the fact that doing more of the same won't solve the problem. They really needed rapid transformational change. So they pivoted the organization and they asked the question, what are the current pain points for their customers' security? They spoke about guards, they spoke about cameras, and then they put in new technology, which was amazing, but it didn't work because it was too expensive. So the double loop learning that Prof spoke about came through there as well. They changed the business model. They leased the tech to cover where there aren't enough guards. They simplified the process where instead of 2 weeks to quote, now they could do it in 5 minutes. They acquired other companies and they could actually see the impact on the bottom line, on the EBITDA of the organization. They managed to maintain the current jobs. They created more technical jobs. And I think what really stood out for me here was that blue ocean shift. They shifted the discussion from security spend, looking at it through a different lens, asking the customer, what is it that you're trying to achieve? And looking at that price point that could differentiate that at the end of the day. So that in a very quick 2-3 minute summary, Dr. Kernan, is the summary of what we've gone through.
Thank you so much, Letta. I'm sure you can all agree. Letta, good evening and thank you for joining us. We will say goodbye to Letta now. And so in closing, Prof. Klopper, I don't know if you want to close off.
Just one from my side, Mala. When we started this conversation, we spoke about the truth. And let me tell you the truth tonight. For as much as we try to bring all this innovation ideas, creative ideas on how we can transform our businesses, the biggest part of the truth is that there will always be an impact on human capital. And this is why we're striving towards the 5IR, to understand if there should be that dance between humans and computers. So the truth is, we bring new ideas, the people who service the human capital. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Lebo. Lebo is our head of program at Da Vinci. Thank you very much for that contribution, Lebo.
Thank you, colleagues. Yeah, I think Dr. Kernan, if I listen to what Rolton shared with us and what Loic and even the comments and what Lebo just said and some of the earlier things, I think it's safe to say this evening the truth have been spoken about many aspects. And now if I reflect back, I still have many questions myself. We will need to go and read more, and I think Dr. Loic and the earlier comment by Brian also confirmed, that we need to go and read more about that. So I want to thank Ralton and Loic. I think it was a good session, and I appreciate the interactiveness. And I think the reflection on the case study and just learning from that is a puzzle that we always struggle to put together. And I think the time to market discussion, I always found that very interesting and intriguing.
Thanks, everyone, and we wish you all a good evening, and we hope you will join us next month for Curiosita. And Loic and Ralton, I agree completely with Prof. It's been very innovative and exciting to listen to very different views. So thank you very much for that, and good evening to everyone, and thank you for joining us.